This is video 3 of week 6, and I'm going to present now some other ways in which we can address the question of the relationship between how language is represented in the mind, or if you want a more neutral way of saying it, the relationship between language and the brain, or language and the mind. And this other methodology is behavioral evidence. So the point of departure of that in the studies of multilingualism is an observation, which is that multilingual people at all ages speak fluently in at least one of their languages. They can use one language and not another, or invoke the other language when needed, or resist interference from perhaps a stronger language. So the question is, how do they do that? How do multilinguals manage with that complex mental complexity? So one of the questions that has been targeted is whether languages, the different languages, we're going to take two as a sample here, the different languages in the multilingual's mind are activated alternatively, meaning when you are activating language 1, language 2 is deactivated, and when you activate language 2, obviously language 1 will be deactivated. So there's an alternation of activation, or at the same time, meaning both languages are activated in the speaker's mind at the same time, and somehow still you end up speaking only one or a mixture of both, but you know, the way you want to speak, right? So the hypothesis that if both languages are activated are alternatively, now one, now the other, it must be because there is a mechanism that allows for the switching back and forth. Okay, so we have the two languages and a mental mechanism that activates one while the other one is deactivated, and then it can switch to activating the second one while at the same time deactivating the former. Now, the other possibility is that if both languages are activated simultaneously, always at the same time, it must be because there is another mechanism that allows the inhibition of one language on the call of the other. So when you have everything activated all the time, but you have an extra element, an extra mechanism that inhibits the expression of one of the languages while you are using the other one, and the other way around. Okay, so what are different methodologies that have been used in addressing this question? The first one is reaction time data. The idea being that processing that contains more mental steps or travels over greater mental space will take longer to execute in measurable time, where the unit of analysis is milliseconds. When we say a measurable time, is just, we're talking about milliseconds. Okay, so the more mental operations that you make, or the more space those mental operations take, the longer it would take for you to respond to something, because it will take time to do those extra steps, right? The assumption also is that tracking people's eyes, you can establish what they are paying attention to. So you put together, right? So you can also, you can have an eye tracking laboratory. And actually here at the University of Groningen, we have a very active one. And you can see what people are paying attention to, but at a given time, by tracking what they are looking at. So they have used that on advertisement, for example. So look at these two versions of the same ad, which is one for diapers. So in the first one, it was discovered that there's a cute baby looking at you from the ad, and if you see the little colors, the redder the codification, the more time people spent at looking at that point. So you can see in the before version of it that people were looked at this ad and paid a lot of attention to the baby, and then a little bit to the text, and a little bit to the product itself, but mostly the attention was directed to the baby. So of course that's not what you want, because yes, you want to catch people's attention, but you want them to understand that this is it's diapers, not babies, that you're selling, and that they should read the legend that you include there. So they saw that by making this second version of the same ad, in which the baby was actually looking at the legend of the ad, people were paying a lot more attention to the legend itself and to the product. And of course, that's what you want, because you persuade people by telling them the glories of your product, not by showing them cute pictures of the baby, right? So just by modifying that and then tracking people's gaze, they could see which of the ads was more effective in this particular campaign. Okay, so why is that relevant for us? Because you can track what people are doing mentally, for example, paying attention, by tracking their eye movements. Okay, and then you can use that, and you can measure the time that they spend in one place or another of some stimuli, to see what matters to them the most, and from that you deduce what their mental operations are. Okay, so let me give you an example. This is a real experiment of comparing monolinguals to multilinguals. So the word pet was sounded to the subjects, and those were English speakers. So pet in English means, that's what this means, right? Small animal, small or big animal that you keep domestically. So that's called the target. When you hear pet, people look at that picture, because that is what represents the word. They have been instructed to look at the pictures that they're hearing the name of, right? Words like bed, for example, are very similar to pet, and they are identical in the first two sounds, and they only differ at the end. So you expect them to look at them more than, say, words that like pot, right? So monolingual, because pot is different from early on from bed. Yeah. So monolinguals actually effectively they looked more when they heard pet. They looked more at both target and cohort words. Now they were compared. No, sorry. And then there was no, sorry. Now, the same experiment was made with bilinguals that spoke English and Dutch. Now, in Dutch, the word pet is a cognate with English little animal to be something of a cup. Okay, so in Dutch, that cup is a pet. So then bilinguals, they also looked at the target and the cohort words longer and more immediately than at other words that were not related. But they also looked crucially at the cognate word for the stimuli. Okay, so monolinguals pay attention to the target and the cohort, because both of them get activated, so to speak, but bilinguals can't help, even if they are tested just in English and they are told, look, this is English, they can't help but looking at cognates in their other language. Right. So what does this mean? Well, this means that the representation of two languages in the bilingual mind is distinct, yeah, but both languages remain active during any language use. So that means that both languages are activated. Otherwise, if they are told, look, forget about your Dutch, so to speak, and concentrate on your English, why are bilinguals looking at also the Dutch version of the word? And that's because they can't help it, but both languages are activated at the same time. So what is the discussion? Well, it's the responsibility then of an inhibitory process to suppress the non-relevant language and allow the required one to carry out the task, right? So if both languages are activated at the same time, there has to be an extra mechanism that inhibits one and allows the other one to come out, because only one language comes out of your mouth typically, right? Now, in adults, the two languages are functionally independent in all situations, because adults can just decide to speak only one language, and then even though there's also joint activation and shared conceptual representations. So both are activated at the same times, but adults are not confused by the fact that two linguistic systems share processing space for knowledge and communication. They are multilingual adults, bilingual adults, Dutch, English adults, don't go confused because both languages are activated at the same time in their minds, right? Well, children are also not confused. But it's true that they might need some time to master the switching of attention and the inhibitory control, since it might compete with their need to communicate. So children might not master the inhibition so well, and we know it because inhibition is very difficult for children, more than for adults, and it's also developmentally dependent, and it also depends on personality and so forth, right? But for children, the same as for adults, both systems get activated in their mind simultaneously, and adults have mastered the technique of inhibiting one and allowing the second one to manifest, why children might not. And that's why children might actually mix languages more than adults and so forth. Eventually, in multilinguals, this constant mental inhibition and attentional exercise might have cognitive consequences. Those are the costs and the benefits. So it might be costful to have this extra mechanism if you have two languages, but then you also might have the benefit of exercise, right? So in mental terms, that is what we understand by cognitive reserve. So it might be that the more you exercise your brain, like any muscle, the more prepared you are in case of brain injury or just aging of that organ, right? So this idea of cognitive reserve came from seeing that there were extra exercise that multilinguals had to do on a daily basis, on a regular basis, in order to master these inhibition and attention tasks that are imposed by the mere fact of them having two languages. And this was put in relationship with, again, with animal models, in which we saw that rats that had learned something were more able to cope with brain injury than rats that hadn't, and they were also more able to learn new tasks and so on and so forth. So exercising the brain, and that's no surprise, prepares you better for any contingency in which you might need to be in the best shape for your brain, and that's called cognitive reserve. So the mental representation of two languages for a bilingual is clearly different from that of a monolingual, because monolinguals do not have this inhibitory system, at least not so pronounced all the time. Of course, monolinguals have to inhibit which words might come up to their mind, and then they have to make a word choice and so on, but not this systematic and overly present task of always selecting between the two languages that are activated at the same time, because they only have one, right? But that does not mean that bilinguals are a simple compounding that would result from compiling two systems into a place normally occupied by one. So this is again this idea that bilinguals might not be the sum of two monolinguals. Okay, so it's just that there is an extra system, inhibitory system that is in place, and that switching of attention that is in place, that is actually qualitatively different from what we might encounter in the processing of language and the use of language of a monolingual. So while you might have different kinds of linguistic existences in being monolingual in one language or the other. When you are bilingual, you are not the simple sum of those two systems. The two systems are activated at the same time, and you don't have a chaos. What you have is a completely different mental existence uh, in multilinguals. Okay. And next video will deal with the experiments, a few more experiments that target more specifically the linguistic competence of, or the linguistic ability of multilinguals.